Welcome back to Define Gentrification. I'm your host, Kristen Jeffers, and this is a great week to watch the show. So, this is the all video version of the show. It's going to sound a little different, it's going to feel a little different, but it's still going to, the interview is going to be the same, the hot topic is going to be the same. But I wanted to honor the fact that we are here together on YouTube. Now, let's get started with the main show. Welcome to Define Gentrification. I'm your host, Kristen Jeffers, and this week I have Arionne Nettles with me. They put out a wonderful book called We Are the Culture, and I came to the interview expecting to talk about that book and how so much of Black culture has not shaped not only Chicago, but of course our whole Black migration project in the United States and really the globe. And of course, we had a very special bonus conversation that I've been wanting to have with a fellow Black millennial that's been socialized as feminine and female. And I've really enjoyed having that part of the conversation as well. Plus, the hot topic this week, I had to go in on those terrible parking meters in Chicago. And I want this to be a prescriptive warning for you to not make that decision. But first, of course, I have books this week. I have one book this week. It is Arionne's book. But let me take a pause. Let's talk about my bookshop. So yes, bookshop.org/shop/Christine Jeffers is your resource. You want this resource. You want to buy a book from me on bookshop.org. Nothing against the site with an A, but this one is just all books all the time. And when you purchase from me as a bookshop affiliate, you get to give back to producing this podcast. Pretty soon, I'm going to have other guests. I'm going to be on location. The videos are going to get even more sharper and better. And that comes from you buying from the bookshop.org store. Plus, I have a curated selection. I have a Black Urbanist book list with all of my classic urbanist books that I think are worth reading. Then I have a bookshelf that's specifically for books like the one we're going to talk about today, like We Are the Culture, that specifically speaks to the Black experience, the Black feminine experience, the Black queer experience, the Black disabled experience. All of those live on the bookshelf, that bookshelf. And then, for my crafty people out here, I have a shelf for you as well, and there's some pretty awesome and dope books there too. So, bookshop.org/shop/Kristen Jeffers. The link is in the show notes. The link is right here. I just told you. And yes, you can search Kristen Jeffers Media and you will find me on Bookshop. And now let's talk hot topic. Yes, hot topic, y'all, of the week is a bad budget deal. Now, this is a simmering hot topic. It's been a hot topic now for about 15 going on 16 years. And it's going to be a hot topic, unfortunately, for another 65 plus years. Why? Because that's also part of the problem. So in the show notes today, our reference article for today is from Chicago's PBS affiliate, WTTW. In 2022, they did a wonderful explainer of why this is a problem that Chicago's parking meters are run the way they are. So just for people who don't understand the whole concept and the logic around parking meters. So right now, under this whole settler colonial experimentation that we're doing, land has value. Yes, including your parking space. Just like you pay rent for your house or you pay a mortgage, and then of course you pay property taxes on your property if you've paid off your mortgage. Where you park your car, if it's not part of your designated property, is also part of something that needs to be paid for. That's why we pay for parking in some places and we don't pay for it in others. Now, when you go to like Target, Walmart, all those places, they've paid for the parking lot The parking lot is an amenity for you to come and shop at the store. Now, in other places where, like, say you go to your favorite downtown district or favorite sort of walkable shopping and restaurant district, some of those places either have already paid for your parking or you still have to pull a ticket and you get it validated at the desk. Generally, that's how most Whole Foods operations work. When I go to Whole Foods, that's what I do. This is not a sponsored ad for Whole Foods. Let me make that clear. It's just one of the places, and same Target, Walmart. Those are not Bookshop's the only affiliate here, but just like I I curate those books for you, and I tell you what books to buy, or at least think about buying. The parking lot is like that. The parking lot is set up for you if you come in a vehicle, like a private vehicle, for you to be able to do that. Similarly, that's why I'm so big on public transit being covered, because parking lots are covered. It's honestly, to the average consumer, it's cheaper to park than it is to get on transit, because parking is basically, if you've already budgeted to go to the gas station and then everywhere you have to go, there's a space. If you're having mobility issues, you can, but your issue is just that you can't walk far, but you can still use your arms, or you have the adaptations. I know several people, including one of my cousins, that has adaptations where they can drive as a quadriplegic. Like, but still, you have a vehicle that's outfitted for you, and then you can pull it into a parking lot, and then you can roll or walk or scoot or use your walker and you can carry your walker to go to the store. Or, you and several of your family members, I mean, many of you have families big enough that you can probably get away with driving around in a 16 passenger van everywhere that you go, which is technically counts as a van. So that is the concept. But in many cases, what we are talking about is a concept that many places, many jurisdictions require parking above and beyond what is actually used for space. If you have ever participated in the event called Parking Day, where you literally purchase the meter out and park in a parking space, you learn that, wait, a bed can fit in here, a couch can fit in here. Oh, look, that portable IKEA kitchen, also not a sponsored mention. That portable kitchen from IKEA that has a sink and a stove. Wait, a tent can fit in here. Wait, a parking space could be a studio apartment. Start the noggin tapping here, start the brain tapping, side of head tapping here. Yes. So that has become an issue, but that's a separate issue. And this is why Chicago's parking meter issue is just weird, because effectively, in a short-sighted budget moment, the city thought that it should sell off their parking meters to a private company for $1 billion check. Now, Chicago is massive, and $1 billion in 2008 sounded like a big amount of money. We now are in a world where there are some people that are going to be trillionaires, not just billionaires, but trillionaires. That should scare you, but that's another hot topic for another day. So not only is the city of Chicago locked into this deal where they can't make any money, they've paid off their investment. The $1 billion has been recouped by the parking meter company. So there's a whole bill. They could have been generating maybe $1 billion every year, but that's not the worst part of it. Because the parking meters are owned by a separate company, even though they are on city land, anytime they want to put in a bike lane, food trucks, all of those people have to pay above and beyond what they normally would pay. Also, if you think meters are bad, that you have to pay, and imagine that there's no recourse. There's nobody's sitting here. There's no demand. The meters are often overcharging. And so, of course, you as the consumer is going to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to actually drive my car into the city of Chicago. I'm not going to even go to Chicago. Big parts of Chicago are underserved by transit. Yes, even with CTA in their coverage areas, just like DC, both of those train systems are very good at what they do, but there are so many underserved areas. And it's not okay anymore to just say, oh, well, the people that live by don't choose not to live by transit or don't deserve transit. Many times those homes are cheaper because transit is a economic value for people and they go somewhere else. And so if you're listening to this and you're that person, you're like, yeah, that's me. Like, I hate paying these meters. If for my Chicagoland people, I'm so sorry for you that one, as a municipality, putting on my public affairs municipality hat, you can't get that money to go to public services and you won't be able to grab that money for several years. And two, say we eliminate parking minimums, we eliminate like the need for, we increase transit. Say you want to put in a bus lane, you want to put in a bike lane, this money's got to go to this private entity instead of being reinvested back into creating the service. It has to go to the private entity on the jump. So I want to encourage y'all with this hot topic, watch the video, research this, but I really wanted to make this a hot topic because one, we are talking to a Chicagoan today. We're talking about reasons why one may move away from Chicago, even though it has all this lovely these cultural resources. But we talk about how so much of that cultural resource has been made because us as Black folks have had to move around, and many Black folks are car dependent. My life has improved, honestly, having access to a car in addition to public transit. I use it all. Y'all know I use it all. I'm just now getting back on my bike for reasons. And many people will never return to riding their bicycle. So I want us to really think about, as I'm going to challenge my municipal budget folks, federal and state budget folks, think long and hard. $1 billion might seem like a lot of money, but you all are the economic driver. Just like I've written, and I'm going to include this in my show notes, I've written about how companies need to pay their fair share. Having parking not even be a full public-private partnership, but being a full private partnership where you sold the meters and they are privatized and there's no economic benefit coming back to the city whatsoever, other than maybe taxes, but I don't even think taxes are included in this. This is just a very weird, very wild situation. It creates a unnecessary friction. We live in a world now where people do expect either you pay the parking fee, you pay the fare as a provider of a service or a business, or you get out of that business and you move on to doing something else. So now, let me pause. And I didn't want to have such a long hot topic. I want to really let Arionne's voice shine through. Arionne is a journalist. She is teaches at Northwestern. She has written a book called We Are the Culture. And I'm going to take my ad break and talk about this book and her. So take a moment and let's go to our bookshop store. Yes, so We Are the Culture is our book of the week by Arionne Nettles, our guest for today. It is basically chapter by chapter. It talks about how from journalism to sports to Black media to Black fashion, Chicago was the nucleus. And I love about this book, not just Arionne's personal stories, because I love me a good personal story, and she's brought us some good reflections and personal stories on this episode today. But it also just highlights what the joy, and it's also for those of us who are working in media, those first few chapters is motivation to continue to do a good thing and continue to stay motivated. So We Are the Culture is available in my bookshop store, bookshop.org/shop/Christine Jeffers. And let's get on into this interview with Arionne Nettles, author of We Are the Culture, professor at Medill Journalism School. I'm doing all this introduction. Episode sounds a little different today because you'll see. You'll see. So, welcome back to Defying Gentrification. Again, I'm Kristen Jeffers, and I have a wonderful guest with me. And in fact, I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves. Now, I've already done some of the introduction, but I want her to talk because it's just an honor to be on the mic with another journalist that has such a place orientation as I do. And of course, the place we are talking about today is Chicago, and it is worthy of being acclaimed and talked about. And yeah, let's just get into it. Arionne, tell folks about yourself.
Hi, I'm Arionne Nettles. I'm from Chicago, from the South Side. I'm a journalist and I currently teach at Northwestern.
Yay. So, Arionne, of course, wrote a wonderful book, We Are the Culture, and it's about Chicago and how Chicago is. Y'all could really make that t shirt Chicago versus everything or versus
Yes.
Black culture because as I am going through it and I'm still in the middle of it and I'm enjoying it. Like it's so rich, it's so
Oh,
culturally rich. Like you did that. You did the thing.
thank you.
In pop culture parlance, you totally did the thing. And of course, as someone who loves infusing place into my work, now I'm kind of realizing that's just okay. Those of us who stayed in like the South were like, oh well, we're just telling our story. We're just making sure everybody knows what's up. And I noticed all of my like colleagues and friends who are on some part of the migration trail, y'all tell your stories to make sure that people know about it. But honestly, Chicago is credited for the migration itself. Do you want to tell folks
Yeah.
a little bit about that? Because some of my audience is still like, oh, well, why did y'all all pack up and move all across the country and then you're still complaining?
Yeah. Yeah. I
I mean,
mean, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I guess the first thing is we still complaining because even though, families change,
hmm
I do think it's important to recognize, like many of us do, um, that discrimination and racism looks different in different places. So it's
hmm
really disingenuous to say that people packed up and they left the South and there was no more racism, right? We know that
No,
that
no,
was
nope.
not true. So, of course, there's still issues. Those issues just look very different. And so I did want to make sure that, like, whenever I would talk about those things, I didn't want to glorify it. But at the time, there were some reasons why people decided to kind of pack up and leave. And the reason why I want to say multiple reasons is because, everybody is still not a monolith. And so, but this
hmm
combination of reasons were around what people really cited and what the Chicago Defender really used when asking people and kind of convincing them to move to places like Chicago. So the first was not just racism, but violence.
hmm
And so the increase in lynchings and like really physical violence, although Chicago um still did very much have kind
hmm
of a its own segregation. That segregation was not legal. It was there were invisible lines that we would actually see in 1919 during the race riots in 1919 that happened in Chicago during that
hmm
red summer that many places
hmm
experienced. We also had that here. Um, but that physical violence was not as common in places like Chicago, and it was, not as outwardly open.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but one thing that I think I did not maybe understand um until I got a lot older was the economic reasons for people to move out of the South. So, at the time, there was this bug, the boll weevil.
Yes, yes.
And it was really affecting crops, like cotton crops. And
Mhm,
so you had so many Black folks who were into sharecropping as their primary form of taking care of their families. And if, let's say, they're doing this on white land and now
Mm-hmm.
the white landowners are not making as much money, they're paying the black folks working the land less money. And it just made it really difficult for people to be able to take care of their families the same way that they could. And so when you look at places like Chicago, and I'll put Chicago there because at the time, right, you're starting to have this kind of industrial revolution. We see
Mm-hmm.
factory jobs, and then especially at the start of the World War, a lot of those lower wage factory jobs that may have been able to be employed by, let's say, like immigrants into the
Mm-hmm.
country from places like Europe, that immigration was stalled. And so these factories were more open to now hiring Black labor. So opportunities, financial opportunities, economic opportunities were opening up for Black folks in a way that they previously weren't, right? And of
Mm-hmm.
course,
Mm-hmm.
when you think about it, why?
Yeah.
It's also because they want to pay Black folks lower
Less.
wages than the white people,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so it's still racism, it's still segregation, it's still discrimination, they were still pitting like the Black workers against like the white folks who were trying to like unionize and organize, and then Black folks weren't allowed in the unions. And so there was still a lot of stuff. However, if it is between you picking cotton
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to take care of your family, but there's an opportunity to come to this place, you read the Chicago Defender, it's telling you where to go to get a job,
Mm-hmm.
what number to call to
Mm-hmm.
find a place to live, what schools your kids can go to. Everything is laid out there for you. It's looking appealing, and most people are starting to now have family who's made that trek, who've moved to other places. And now they have somebody, to kind of welcome them. And that's really important, right? Having
Mm-hmm.
community,
Mm-hmm.
creating community. So you're going to want to move someplace where there is a community to welcome you, where they say, hey, not only do we want you to come to Chicago, we're helping you get here and we're telling you exactly where to go when you get here. And that kind of is what made the difference.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks don't always see that. And one of the things, like way back, I had talked with Marcus Robinson and Marcus Hunter rather, and Zandria Robinson about their lovely book Chocolate Cities, that really digs into
Mm,
the numbers, the data, the migration patterns. And as a North Carolinian, like a lot of people are like, okay, well, we're one of the handful of southern states that had sort of this like hybrid environment. In a lot of
mhm.
ways, we were by the 50s, some of those same factories were hiring us, but nobody's unionized anyway. Like unions,
Yeah.
they won't even let nobody unionize. And then
Mm.
we're on the East Coast, and there's still this closeness. Like you can't get but so far, and you could easily, like, you're 6 hours from DC and you're 6 hours from Atlanta.
Mm.
But I would be interested, and this will be a good way to kind of talk about kind of you grew up in Chicago, but your family had roots in the Mississippi Delta.
Yeah.
And then you have family, like you got family that have created a cultural institution. Then they start talking about it a little bit. But I'll get back to the Chicago parts, but let me talk about this culture shock and homesickness that you had in Tallahassee. Like,
Oh, yes,
tell
yes,
me about that, because
yes,
I did my background. And I was like, okay,
yes,
the
yes.
Tallahassee years. I briefly went to Tallahassee for a law school camp over at Florida
Oh,
State, summer of
okay.
2006. My our Drea Rowland, who's another wonderful journalist, fam
Mhm.
grad, and like has found their way back into journalism. We
Oh,
thought we
I
was gonna
love
be
it.
we thought we was gonna be lawyers, but clearly
Okay,
there was another
it's
plan.
hard, yeah. We
But yeah, we thought there was another plan. So I'm assuming that, looking at your degrees, it wasn't journalism at first. Like,
yeah,
how
it
did
was business, yeah.
yes, how did FAM and Tallahassee, what role did
Yeah.
that play in you deciding, or was it Memphis that made you say, look, I got to do something else? So tell me about those collegiate
Oh,
early years before.
yeah. Yeah. So they actually, Tallahassee, living in
Mhm.
Tallahassee, um, at first, because I had grew up in Chicago and outside of spending summers in
Mhm.
Atlanta, I had never really gone anywhere. Like I
Mhm.
always been up under my mama. And
Yep.
even when I spent the summers in Atlanta, I was up under my auntie. And
Mhm.
sometimes I would cry and my dad would have to drive down there and come get me because I would cry too much. So I
Yes.
was just, I just was a homesick girl. I did not leave my family, right?
Yeah, yeah, same.
Um,
Me too.
So me saying I'm gonna go to school in Tallahassee, right? So far from home. That was an ambitious decision, but when I stepped on the campus, it felt like home. It felt right.
Mhm.
And then, but that first week, I was crying every day. Oh, I was struggling. Um, but then, I mean, that's why culture and connection
Mhm.
and community becomes so important. Um, and I think that now culture is so connected, right? Like
Mhm.
because we have YouTube, because we have all these different social media things, things don't feel so regional.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I think we still have our regional like things where we're like, oh, this is special, but things don't feel foreign. When I went to Tallahassee, I felt foreign. I was like, these Black people are different. But then
Mhm.
also, I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
but also now I got a friend from LA. Oh, she's different. Oh, wait, now my friend from New York, he's different. Like, so it's like friends from everywhere. Everybody's different. And so it was like the first time I was really exposed to how regional differences,
Mhm.
even if we all Black.
Yep, yep.
Um, and somebody was telling me about how I can't remember where I heard this, but it was I'm sure it was on a podcast. And I remember someone saying when you're at a HBCU, that's what happens because you're in an all Black space. And
Mhm.
so you're able to appreciate the differences outside of the fact that it's like we just Black, right? And
Mhm.
so I appreciated that because I was able to really appreciate like Florida culture for specifically, right? So,
Mhm.
and I say that because if I'm talking to people and I'm like, "Oh, I just love Florida," right? And people are like, "Florida." And I'm like, "Listen, I'm not talking about politics in
Six in
Florida."
Florida.
Right? Because I don't
No.
really like no politician, right?
Mm-mm.
Like
No.
and as a journalist, I should not
Mhm.
stand any politician. I can have respect for some. I can, think that some are on a decent track, but I'm not, crazy about
No, and we
any
supposed to be calling
politician.
that out. We
Exactly,
supposed to be calling
exactly.
it out.
Exactly. So, but when I say I love Florida, I'm talking about the people of Florida. I'm talking
Mhm.
about these rich cultures, right? Like, and recognizing, like, okay, well, when I'm in North Florida, this is what it feels like, right? Then I go down to South Florida and I'm starting to get like these kind of like Caribbean and Haitian like
Mhm.
influences
Mhm.
mixed up in there, right? That's a different flavor. And so, like, these are such unique, cool, amazing differences that I want to celebrate. And then moving to Memphis,
Yes.
Memphis is just a cool, bluesy
Yes.
place.
Mhm.
Um, it's a very religious place too, where the
Mhm.
joke is that there's a church on every corner. But it really does seep through how Black Memphis cares for each other.
Mhm.
So my experience living in Memphis right after out of college was so much love and care.
Mhm.
It was just a lot of community care, right? Something happens to somebody, people in this community feel obligated to step in and help them, right? And so that's what I felt. So coming back to Chicago, it's like I was coming back to Chicago with all this love for these places. So even though initially I'm like, oh, I feel out of place, I feel nervous, I'm
Mhm.
homesick, right? Like
Mhm.
I quickly got over those feelings.
Mhm.
And so I appreciate this connection that we have to the South. I appreciate the connection that we have to, that my family has to this Mississippi Delta
Mhm.
area, right? Like, because I know that we could not be us without Mississippi,
Mhm.
right? And specifically Mississippi because Chicago, Black Chicago is filled
Mhm.
with people, with families who originated specifically in Mississippi, right? So
Mhm.
we cannot not love Mississippi,
Mhm.
right? Mississippi culture, the richness of it, and love and appreciate ourselves, right? And so I think that um I know me, I've been thinking a lot about that, and I've been thinking a lot about our connection to that and how I just want to make sure I'm always appreciative of it and feeling that connection. I don't ever want it to be um I don't ever want it to feel like competition. You know, of course, you have your
Yeah,
just where you're
yeah.
like, you should feel like I'm from the best place in the world, right? Like,
Yes.
I honestly feel like everybody should feel that way. I think you
Yes.
should feel that way.
Mhm.
But I don't see like the South as like a different place. I feel like it's just a different part of me,
Mhm.
but
No.
I feel like it's a part of me for sure. Like, there's no way I can't be who I am without the South
Oh,
for
no.
sure.
No, and I also, like, because 'cause I'm on that East Coast migration, like, there's so
Mhm.
many Carolinians here, and a lot of people don't realize, yeah, we got that chocolate city moniker in DC, but
Mhm.
it feels different. Whereas, like, I feel like Chicago is like you have your sections. DC
Yeah.
had that moment where it felt like everybody was Black, but there are economic factors going on
Mhm,
here.
mhm.
we had we went through waves of the federal government saying, "Hey, Black folks, come and work for us." Uh, Hopefully, we are not in that progression where we're going back to the person that was working in a cage, but or why that. But that's the thing. You need community because
Yeah,
even if you're not at that point, when we as Black folks decide to go somewhere, it's a different drive than others.
yeah.
I used to have a concept, and I still have it. It's still in the archives of my blog. This concept of being an American expat in America,
Mm.
because often I knew, yeah, I knew my accent was different. I knew my
Mhm,
relationship to food was different. I even knew my relationship to, like, we're strongly, just like Memphis is like a very churchy city. North Carolina is a very churchy state. Even to this day in
mhm,
Charlotte, like, people have a church, even if they're
mhm.
more liberal, and even if they don't necessarily like do God the same
Yeah,
way.
even if
They
you don't go, you
You
got a
don't go, you
church.
go, you got to
That's
find
your church, though.
somebody.
Yeah.
Yes. You got that's,
That's
for
your
some.
family church. What church your
Yes.
family go to?
Yes. Yes. And so that's what I feel like community making is in Black communities. And that's what I worry that we miss out on. Like, I had started this show really because I started to notice, and you as a working journalist, you notice, like, that words matter, that
Mhm,
how we talk about certain phenomena matter. And in the conversation around where Black folks are living. Like, literally for me, I was sitting in my master's
mhm,
program in public administration, immersing myself in my subject matter, and then
mhm,
I read
mhm.
my textbook critically. And I was learning about just how many thriving Black neighborhoods were thrown away. Because down south, it didn't matter
Yeah.
who you were, they were just gonna get rid of you. And you
Right, they
probably
gonna
weren't.
take them.
Yeah,
They
and
gonna
they
steal them.
yeah, and you probably weren't thriving because they weren't paying you enough. Yeah, they might let you work on the field, like, side by side. Maybe they'll let you work in the factory side by side. Yeah, you got your little Black school. And yeah, of course, our HBCU culture is like unmatched. I mean, I say Aggie
Mhm.
pride to somebody, even though I went to the white schools, but it's a
It's a
GHO is GHO. I
It
mean,
count. And also, like, that's what I think, whenever I finally, like, life lets me, like, really dive into my podcast how I want to,
yes.
that was my idea behind it, was not that it's just for HBCU alums,
Mm-hmm.
but that HBCUs are for all of us, right? Because they
Mm-hmm.
are tenants of our community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, HBCUs are where kids go and have cheerleading competitions. HBCUs are where the community gathers to go get COVID shots.
Mm-hmm.
HBCUs are these important
Mm-hmm.
places.
Mm-hmm.
And they are and will always be, and it's not, you did not have to go to one, right?
Right.
To recognize and understand their importance. And so like, and like you mentioned, even just like as an economic driver of a
Mhm.
neighborhood or a community or a region. Um, and so I think that is like what celebrating Black culture is, right? It doesn't necessarily mean
Mhm.
you only celebrate stuff that you are connected to. You should
Mhm.
be able to celebrate stuff that has nothing to do with you or that you were just tangentially near, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, and I growing up with A&T, like
Mhm.
everything stops for the parade. And then
Mhm.
not so
Mhm.
much the tailgate, like everybody does the tailgate, but the parade is a whole different avenue. And of course, just getting up and seeing the bands and everything. My mom's a Bennett Bell, so just kind of the city
Mhm.
school, one of the two remaining all women
Yeah.
HBCUs in the country
Yep, yep.
besides Spelman. So some of that we had some of that energy. And I think, that created like a southern bubble. Like that created that
Okay.
bubble of, well, why would people leave? And why would people break their own
Yeah.
community down? And why are people complaining about not making money and getting ahead? And oh, they went up north and now they're coming back. They're coming back because,
Mhm. Mhm.
we're millennials. So the return migration is starting to happen with people. But in a lot of ways, you and I kind of moved, like, well, your hometown is a major Black cultural center. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I need to get to a even bigger major Black cultural center.
Yeah.
What
But I
made you decide to come home, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the time, I mean, I came home, but I will always leave. Like, and I don't want to say it in that way
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm always connected. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, um, because after coming home from Memphis, I worked here for a while. These were all before I was journalist too.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
moved to the Atlanta area
Mm-hmm.
for a little bit. It just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like the job wasn't a good fit and
Yeah.
everything. And so I
Yeah.
came home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just say that because I've always been open. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to things that feel right, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like I'm losing Chicago when I leave because somebody told me really early on like Chicago is home, it's always going to be there. And so just having that idea in my brain has like really allowed me to not really be afraid to move
Mm-hmm.
places. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've looked into moving to DC, right? Like I've looked into moving everywhere, right? I've always
Mm-hmm.
been open. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not um I love this place and I will always work on it and work for it. And that will
Mm-hmm.
not change no matter I where I reside. And so but I think at that time it was just like, literally I'll go someplace, try
Mm-hmm.
it out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like this isn't a good fit. So
Mm-hmm.
it is if I'm not living in Chicago, it does need to be a good place that is usually like job wise
Mm-hmm.
is a good fit. Job is usually the reason.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I don't often get to have this kind of conversation with like people and guests. Like for like Black women and Black feminine folks, like the job has to be right. It has to be paying. And oftentimes when we go in these job environments and our thoughts are challenged, like I know for me, I lived in Kansas City for like a year and some change. Now,
Mhm.
Kansas City had the infrastructure, it was fun. I still miss Burnings. Like that's the one thing that I wish I could get properly. Now we have Hill Country here in DC that kind of does that style. And then of course, when I would go to Gates, I would be like, oh, it's the chopped kind. And I have a cousin that moved with his wife out to Kansas
Wait,
City.
what's that? Tell me.
So out in North Carolina, like our barbecue style is
Oh,
we've got
yes, yes. Oh, wait. No, no, no. I do know that. Let me tell you why I do know that. Because
yes,
my dad orders Gates seasoning online.
yes,
Yes, and I have
yes,
some in my cabinet. Yes. Okay.
yes,
I can
yes.
I can picture it now. Yes,
It's that
yes.
vinegar, it's that chopped, and that's the other thing. Like, when the food changes, like for me,
Yep.
I
The
gotta
truth.
be
The
able to
food
eat.
does change this. I do got to be able to eat. That is a priority. That is
Like
true.
people are
I
like,
mean,
why you can't
luckily,
eat?
yes, I have to I think well, I will say the only thing that is a priority is that I have to be around Black people.
That too.
Um,
That
And
too.
so I probably would not consider a job anywhere or a role anywhere or anything that would not have me in community with Black
Mhm,
folks.
mhm,
Um, because I don't want to feel like I'm the minority and I
mhm,
can't, I'm not sure if I'm the only Black family on the block, and that's honestly that's
yeah,
never going to be me. And
no,
so I get that some people, they don't mind that. They grew up that way, but that was not my experience growing up.
mhm,
I was always surrounded
mhm,
by Black love, Black
mhm,
culture, like
mhm,
Black everything. And
mhm,
so um I can't leave what feels so great
mhm,
and then like move anywhere where I'm like the only. Like that is not gonna ever be for me. So if a place did not have enough diversity, like it would not even be a option. Like it would simply be like we're not even gonna talk about it. That is probably my one only
mhm.
we're not even gonna discuss it. Yeah.
And I'm glad you're saying this because I got some people that's gonna listen and be like, well, why can't y'all care more about like the urban form and if y'all have public transit, like
I don't care. I don't care. I'm gonna drive. So I don't need public transit. I have a car. Um, the thing that I cannot replicate and I cannot make is I cannot make people love me and my son. I can't make people not
Mhm,
be racist. I cannot make people, and that is not to say
mhm.
that it has to be like an all Black place, right? Like I'm
Yeah,
not saying
yeah.
that, but I'm just saying is that like, um, I don't want my son to be like the only Black kid in his school. I don't
Mhm,
want these things, right? Like
mhm,
one of the things that I love that I prioritize over everything is that like I have a special needs son, and one of the things I prioritize is that um he has the best school experience
mhm,
when he is in a school where the teachers and the teachers aides view him with love and like
mhm,
he is a person that they
mhm,
could that he could be their son, right?
mhm,
And I
mhm,
say that because like his teacher now is white. And so it's
mhm,
not that it's an all Black, I mean, like it's a predominantly Black school. So it's not necessarily that it's race, but like the school is, it's mostly Black and Latino, and everybody that works there loves those kids so much. They see
mhm,
these kids every day. They care about them, they hug them, they like, I mean, like the love is, you can
mhm,
feel the love they
mhm,
have. And with kids who like, like my son is nonverbal, he can't tell
mhm,
me. So I have to have a place that I can trust. And one time when I was living outside of Atlanta,
mhm,
he was like, I think it was maybe only one or two Black kids in that class.
mhm,
And they would just call me all the time and be like, we think Jackson's not feeling well today. Could you come pick him up? And I'm like, what? He seems very fine to me, right? And it's like, do you
Thank
just
you.
not want
Yeah.
to deal with him? So it's just, and even if that is an unconscious bias that
Mhm,
that they are having because they're not used to working with little Black kids, they have that bias, and
mhm,
so I don't have time for that. I don't have time to decipher it. I don't have time to maneuver it, right? Like we have so many things to work through in life.
mhm,
These are things I don't have time to worry
mhm,
about, right? So I don't
mhm,
have time to worry about if my neighbors are racist,
mhm,
okay? I'm gonna
mhm,
assume
mhm,
that you would not move into this neighborhood if you was
mhm,
racist because it's all these Black people, right?
mhm,
I'm going to assume that
mhm,
you would not work at this school with all these Black kids if you don't like Black kids, right? So I have to like self-select for
mhm,
my sanity,
mhm,
um because there's so many places in this world where we can't help that, right? We
mhm,
cannot make people not be racist. We cannot make people not be bigoted, and
mhm,
we
mhm,
absolutely cannot even make people confront the biases they don't even know that they have.
mhm.
But I don't want to be the recipient of those in places where I need to relax, where I need to just be
Yeah.
at, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to leave a place where I feel so comfortable
Mhm,
to a place that now I have like this animosity where I lay my head at night and all that. Like, I'm not doing it. So that is actually the only thing that's my only like non-negotiable. And I do not care about that. And I know, and we see on like social media every day, somebody's like, I moved my family out to this suburb and we are the only Black family, and the kids are teasing my kid, and I think the people are tormenting us, and I ain't got time for that. I do not have time for that. And again, I know everybody has a different situation, so I'm not judging other people's
Mm-hmm.
choices. That's
Mm-hmm.
their choice. It's not going to be my choice.
Mm-hmm. And the
And I
thing
got a
is, yeah,
choice.
yeah, and we do have choices. Like I know for me,
Mhm.
I love that little village life that we have right here,
Mm.
but it does feel a little corporate and sterile. Like
Mm.
it's like we went from being in a mostly like Black part of PG, but even a part
Mhm.
where even PG people are like, y'all there? I'm
Mhm.
surprised
Mhm.
y'all can survive there.
Yeah.
How y'all holding on there? Now
And
my
that's what
part
I was looking at. I said, if I move to the DC area, get me up in PG County. That's
Oh
where
no,
I'm
no, I
living.
will tell you exactly where you might be like want to go, and especially having a disabled child. Like, Maryland, that's the thing. Maryland has become the poster right now. The Black
Yeah.
governor situation is real. Now, like we just
Mhm.
said, we don't love every politician, but
Exactly.
Black governor, mayor of Baltimore, having and being willing to be authentic, like at least have that appearance of authenticity,
Yeah.
be on the streets, speak the language, withstand showing up very authentically
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
crisis situation. As I talked about the whole the Baltimore, the bridge crash in episode 1, but just being there and being supportive, and the community supports them, and the community loves our culture. Like that's
Mhm.
what I have to see. I have to see the community loving our
Yes.
culture. But then
Yes.
I be wrecking my cars. Like car got scratches, car is all
Mhm.
bent up. I got enough room. I have a Honda Fit, so I have like
Okay.
all this room. The seats are all down, but then I'm
Uh-huh.
not. I'm not carting no child around. It's just me and my partner, and we take
Uh-huh.
turns. And she's
Uh-huh.
like, one day she's like, okay, I
Yeah.
need this
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
going on site for my job, and then both of us are like huge like transportation nerds. Like we love and we do it together. But before
Yeah.
her, there was like certain places I wouldn't necessarily go. And then
Mhm.
before her, I realized, okay, some of my people that are so excited about, oh, we need more bike share, we need more this and that,
Mhm.
but they
Mhm.
won't ride the metro all the way out. They won't ride the metro to the tail ends unless it's in Virginia. And even then they complain then because then they claim that they're in more of like a solid of the earth redneck white situation. But I'm like, well, where do you want to go? Like,
Mm.
we built metro here. This is
Mhm.
where places are living. And yes, I miss food. Like now I will say this, DC's food, the gentrification here, one of the things that it has taken from us a little bit,
It's
food is different.
food.
Food is
Mm.
very different. We're just now getting hair salons back in an equilibrium. But then again, I think everybody's like charging a lot for hair. Like, and my stylist just like left me. Like I'm happy for her. She's buying a house in Philly. Like she's doing her own gentrification
Uh-huh.
defying by
Uh-huh.
finding a
Uh-huh.
community where her and her
Yeah.
husband can buy that house. She's like, I'm gonna be right
Yeah.
outside. She found like a black salon in Philly. And I'm like, gosh, the way I was brought up, like, and it was Chicagoans who I borrowed my hair care techniques from, the ladies of Black Curl Magic and Cut It Kinky. Like
Uh-huh.
yeah, they got us traveling for hair, but I'm like, okay, but where am I supposed to go? And
Ah.
on my little pittance of I'm totally independent right now. I'm totally in the
Mhm.
freelancing bucket. And that's really like these are the things I'm thinking about. And then
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
love fiber arts right now. So having that extra room, and that's a room of
Mhm.
refuge and being
Mhm.
creative. I got my partner
Yeah.
sewing now. That's the way we're kind of reclaiming like our
Yeah.
southernness and everything.
Yeah, and wanting space. Sometimes if you want a
Yes.
lot of space, you're gonna have to
Yes.
move out far
Mm-hmm.
because frankly, just in the inner city, it's not gonna be a lot of space. You gotta go out far, right? So I get people make so I really do agree that people need to make whatever
Mm-hmm.
decisions make the best for them. So I don't judge anybody on their decisions. I feel like I have just learned some key things that are like key to maybe my survival, right? Or in
Mm-hmm.
in like my specific situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um because everybody, like even me and my bestest of friends, we all live so different, right? Like I have
Yeah.
one of my best friends is a downtown liver. She's
Yes.
always going to be downtown in a high rise. Okay, that's gonna be her.
Mm-hmm.
She says, I'm single without any
Mm-hmm.
kids. That's how I'm gonna live my life. Okay. And
Well,
so
you
she
get
wants
used
all,
to concierge,
yes,
the mail
exactly.
comes, the food
Exactly.
is right to the
She wants every amenity. Okay.
yes,
And then I
yes.
have another friend who is just gonna do suburban life. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She is like, listen, I am gonna do suburban life. And she's like, now I've done it for so long. My
Mm-hmm.
kids are little suburban kids. And that's where they like to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they like there are certain things that are good about being in a suburb where it's kind of like, oh, we're also everything is like maybe routed within like a 5-minute distance. So like all
Yeah,
of their
yeah.
best friends are like
Mm-hmm.
close to. So like, I mean, I get it, right? Like, so I totally get it. And I think that, I never am like everybody gotta live how I live. But for me, if a neighborhood if there are no neighborhoods that are diverse enough for me
Mm-hmm.
and my
Mm-hmm.
threshold is higher than most,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's probably not gonna make sense for me to move there
Yeah,
because
and
because of just how I move and how I live now. Because it's like compared to how I live now versus if it was compared to how I was when I was in Atlanta or
mm-hmm.
outside of Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was
Like
I was
which
not in
where were
Atlanta.
you? Like what part of
I was I was
east
in
side or west side?
I was in Alpharetta, so I was north of the city
Yeah, okay,
because
yeah.
people advised me to live there. They were because that's where my job was. And they were
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh, you should
Yeah.
live in Alpharetta. They have really top-rated school systems." But that top-rated school system did nothing for me. Right. So
Yeah.
so so again, that's a lesson that I
Yeah.
had to learn for me. However, if my son was neurotypical,
Mm-hmm.
maybe he would have been successful in that school system in a way that he wasn't because he's not, right. He's seen as
Yeah.
different. He can't communicate in that way. So yeah, so everybody's different. But yeah, people are like, you should absolutely move to Alpharetta. I'm like, "Oh, sure?" They're like, yeah, yeah, which also granted, like everybody says, Atlanta traffic is horrible. So they're like, you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to have to
Mm-hmm.
deal with that every day trying to go to work. So
Mm-hmm.
you should just live in Alpharetta. That's what I would do. They got top rated schools. I'm like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Hated it. And that was
Mm-hmm.
also one of the reasons why I was like, let me just go back home. Knowing yourself, being like, if I get someplace and I'm not feeling certain things, I'm going to just want to go home.
No, and I'm loving that we talking about this as the episode because like I've been wanting to get somebody on here to talk about what black women think. Like, and not that we're
Hmm.
a monolith,
Right, right.
but so many people are like, I just can't understand why you would prioritize like making sure you have your culture. I'm like, well, what do you do at night? Like, do you not realize that you've had access to building physical infrastructure that benefits
Hmm.
you?
Yeah.
The data points, like these
Hmm.
school
Hmm.
ratings, even the walk score. Like when we were in PG, we were like, okay, our walk score should be higher. Now it was lower on a technicality because the road was just too wide to really walk
Okay.
across safely. We were seeing folk get hit all the time because most of our
Oh.
folks were transit dependent and they were dependent on having
Hmm.
to walk across the street to the grocery store
Hmm.
when we still
Hmm.
had two pharmacies and they shut them down. They hurried up and shut them down as soon as like all the
Hmm.
pandemic money went away. But that's it. Like they were okay with us like not having the pharmacies, but having plenty brand new remodeled Burger King Not to say it ain't, I not eat everything, but just no
Yeah,
options.
exactly.
Just
And
there's just no options.
yeah.
Do
And
you
that's
feel
another.
like you feel? It
Yeah.
sounds like you feel like that too, and that's a
Yeah,
factor.
it's always a trade-off, right? Like where I live now, there are no close good grocery stores, right?
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Um and so I and again so it goes back to your individual priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So well, when I'm at home, I'm always gonna live on the south side of Chicago. So that's period, right?
Yeah.
Like that's gonna
Yeah.
be it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm in a neighborhood that is like all black, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was like that's not even, but like most of it's not every neighborhood on the south side. So I don't want to say that. There are other
Mm-hmm.
pockets, but Chicago is still really segregated. So
Mm-hmm.
there's not there's not many that you're gonna live in where you're like, this is a, mixed neighborhood. Most of the time it's like this is a Mexican neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
This is a black neighborhood. This is a Puerto Rican neighborhood. Like they are segregated. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there are things that I like. I love like my inner neighborhood, like for my block and the blocks that are around me. I made sure when I moved over here, there were kids playing. I
Mm-hmm.
feel relatively safe. I feel safe enough to walk around. I don't know how far of that circle would be for me, but within
Mm-hmm.
this, I feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's like not a like if I let's say if I forget something, there's like a Walmart that's like maybe 7 minutes away. And then there's like one of those like little grocers where the food isn't necessarily fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in there one or two times, like, because I just needed something. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, so I can't go grocery shopping in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a trade-off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus when I lived in this neighborhood called Hyde Park, which
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
is diverse, but it's only diverse because it's where the University of Chicago is. It's really expensive. So I lived in like a co-op apartment.
Mm-hmm.
I could never afford to buy a home
Oh,
there.
we
Like
there.
how
We there
right.
now.
Like how I have a house here, I could
Yup.
not afford to buy a house there. Like to
Mm-hmm.
buy a house there, you need like a doctor and a lawyer, like both of
Yep.
them together
Mm-hmm.
and have some savings. Like you need that level, right? And it's just me. So, but there was like it was a Trader Joe's and well, it wasn't the Trader Joe's yet. It was like a different thing,
Yeah.
but like now there's a Trader Joe's there, there's a Whole Foods. So all these things are in walking distance of that apartment. But where I am now, none of those types of grocery stores are nearby. So it's like you do have these things where you're like, oh, when I am in a black neighborhood, it is also likely going to be under resourced,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And am I going to run away from that? It just depends, right? So I also like don't blame people, right? Like if you have your priorities or whatever. And I found like most of me and my friends who have kids who live in Chicago though, most of us all want to live in black neighborhoods. Most of my black Chicago friends,
Mm-hmm.
especially the ones with younger kids, because they want to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
those kids grow up in the city, know how to navigate the city, aren't afraid of the city, right? Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't grow up in the suburbs with this fear of going to the city.
Yeah.
Um, and not to say that, like, of course, sometimes some people move to the suburbs because you're like, I need to be close to my job. I can't drive 2 hours to get the job
Mm-hmm.
to work every day in rush hour. I get that. But I think most of us have this desire to still be connected to our city.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just look for that balance, right? Like there are some neighborhoods where it's like, okay, I pay a little bit more, but then I get kind of this. But then I pay a little bit less, but then I don't have this, right? So then I'm just like, okay, I'll just get the groceries on my way home. Okay. I don't have a grocery store in 7 minutes away, but that's fine, right? I'll pay for grocery delivery, whatever, right? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
just kind of maneuver and you kind of like figure it out. Like, what is the balance that makes sense for you and your family? Um, and so, yeah, yeah. When I think about it, all of my Chicago friends, we all really have our kids in the city. And when we talk about it, it's usually for that reason that we really see our kids as city kids
Hmm.
and we want them to be able to grow up. I mean, granted, like Chicago is big, and I only say that compared to like places like where DC proper is tiny, and then there's, you know what I'm
But
saying?
it's not that tiny though.
Well,
Like
it's not that tiny, but like it's not like DC proper is not as big as the
Chicago
city.
proper.
Right, right,
Oh
right.
yeah,
So
Chicago proper is huge.
right. So I just say that to say that like I'm not comparing it to every city, right?
Hmm.
Because um there's also, every breakdown is kind of different. Like, and so when I say the suburbs, right, I guess I'm
Yeah,
saying like the traditional, I want
yeah.
to be away from the rest of y'all, kind of,
No,
I want
y'all's
to be a little bit better.
suburban vibe is on a different level. The Midwestern suburbs, because like when I was in Kansas City, it was like we can't touch Kansas City. Now, Kansas City proper is already large enough. Like I lived at
Mm-hmm.
like in the 30s, like if we are talking numbered streets, and of course, y'all's numbers like go straight down, where our
Yeah,
numbers
yeah.
are like DC numbers expand out from the capital in this odd way, and they don't really
It
make
looked cool.
sense.
I
It's
was
not,
looking at the map because y'all are like a circle, right? It's kind of like a
we're in
circle.
a circle.
We're more of like a grid. So
Yeah.
we're actually like we're an actual grid. So it's like you have like your 0, 0 coordinates, and then you move
Mm-hmm.
out from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, our 0, 0 is the literal Capitol building,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
none the quadrants aren't equal because they can't be equal because some of it is water. And then for those
Mm-hmm.
who really know DC history, know that Alexandria and Arlington were in the original district proper, and of course that yeah.
Oh,
At
so that's
so
another reason why it's a little bit tinier. Okay, look
yeah,
at me learning
yeah.
stuff. This is a
And then
history
you
podcast too. Look at it.
yes. And then we had the original boundary line. Like Howard
Okay.
itself is in what was considered Washington County. So there's
Okay.
elements of DC that used to resemble more of a
Okay.
city county dynamic, but DC has become known for because people love we love Metro so much. We want to have that Metro experience even if we got to drive till we qualify. So you got malls like Tyson's Corner that have the
Mm-hmm.
metro station right next to it. It's still an enclosed mall. You got people that are living in like I think I saw a basement that's going out for $350,000. That's why our prices are as high as they are because like there is variety. Then you have the folks that live well, the Bowie folks have to kind of fight because there's multiple Bowies in a lot of way. There's like 1 minute is Upper Marlboro, then it goes back to being
Uh-huh.
Bowie, and you're still in PG County. Now, mind you, you're still
Mm-hmm.
in PG
Mm-hmm.
County,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have Montgomery County, and then you have the counties have that municipal level. The district itself is considered a city with state elements, which is why we're pushing for statehood because effectively that's the only sensible thing to do with the district because Maryland is slightly more conservative in some ways, and DC is slightly more
Yeah.
liberal or at least progressive,
Mm-hmm.
if you can even
Mm-hmm.
say that. Of course, it's all getting mixed up. Alexandria City as itself, you still have the old town, and it looks very colonial. There are some buildings I don't like to touch, some buildings I can't fathom living in. Like there's literally a remodeled slave quarter where people are living like apartments. I'm like, I can't touch that. But then I turn
Mm-hmm.
around on the other block and there's Alpha Street Baptist Church, historic Black church,
Uh-huh.
legendary. Like,
Wow.
and then people do complain about the gentrification, but the one thing about it is that our transportation is resourced enough where you can find a neighborhood for you. If you want to be connected, you can find a neighborhood that connects you there, but you might have to leave a jurisdiction, and our
Mm-hmm.
jurisdictions
Mm-hmm.
have to work together more. And our
Yeah.
transit, like the head of our transit agency, he loves riding the train, and he's trying to bring us all together. He's trying to actually build up a more of a regional thing besides the sports teams. And yeah, of course, we just have one of each sports team. It's not like we got two crosstown baseball teams. We're trying
We
to
don't even need to. It's
we don't
fine. We don't win. It's
and we
totally
don't and
fine.
we honestly don't even need our men's basketball team. Like we had our whole argument where they were gonna move across the Potomac, and people are like, "Oh, y'all are back." Oh, and not only are y'all back, y'all gonna take all the money. Like right now, we're having a budget problem. Like these are the things. Like people are so excited. Like, oh, well, sports is gonna bring them in, but then y'all don't want to stay. Like really, that phenomena where people move into the suburbs to be away and to be away from stuff and all of that, people just leave the area. They either go way into Virginia and realize they're practically in Richmond. Now, some of them do stay in Richmond and they're okay with one train a week. And some of them are Baltimore and some of them, but they're coming back to the Chicago suburbs, probably those north side suburbs that they were like, I'm leaving. I'm going to go be West Wing. I'm going to be one of those people. Oh, wait, I'm a lower level GS in this. I want to buy that house. Oh, wait, that house in Chicago is half the price of DC. And just like they want to feel comfortable. Yeah, we have our comfort levels as well. That's well and good. But what I love about DC is that you do see everybody. Like this neighborhood, there are neighborhoods they have tried to gentrify, and it is so
Mm-hmm.
funny because it is not happening properly. Now, the sad part about it is, yes, the rent rates are too high, but the grocery store is still there. We still got all of our Whole Foodses, and we are up in there at all times of the day and night. Like you can't not go to Whole Foods and see somebody black because they kind of failed at that. Everybody rides public transit. Everybody does things here, and you got the core of. But one of the things I think is different, and that's why I love the book so much. And I do want to mention the book before we kind of wrap it up. Like I was like, we gonna talk offline a little bit more because this has been fun. But that is why I love the book, because lately I've been thinking a lot about how DC is the chocolate city, supposedly. It is a chocolate city in population, it is a chocolate region. But I be in Baltimore more often than not. Like, no lie. Now, of course, all my DC people listening,
Mm-hmm.
y'all know y'all need to be sending me some artistic recommendations and food recommendations. And y'all need to be telling me the right parts of PG and even like Alexandria and even Arlington to roll up in, so I can feel like that I'm eating like I'm in North Carolina, but I'm having a good time. Me and my partner are having fun and everybody's cool with everything. But Chicago, the there was room for people to create. It wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna get a job at the government, I'm gonna be all right. Oh, I can't do X, Y, and Z because the government's gonna come after me. Like our our promised land to me is still too tied to the federal government and the fact that somebody can get you a job in some sort of division. And no, nothing wrong with that if that's what you need, especially like my friends with children. Like you do what you got to do, just like we've talked about in this episode. But whereas Chicago, I think that's where the room was
Yeah.
for
It's
everything to
it's
flourish and have all those
yeah.
institutions.
Yeah. It's also it's just a very different hustle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if let's say, you working at a a mill or a factory,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you might do that and then pursue your music career on the side, right? Like that's your
Mm-hmm.
creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a doctor at Howard Hospital,
Yeah.
you don't have to, like that is your passion, that is your everything. So I also recognize that like certain careers are demanding in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like I think that has just like maybe affected the vibe of the place, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows DC for it being like more upper middle class, right? Having
Mm-hmm.
black folks earlier, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
black people being able to have those types of jobs where they couldn't
Yeah.
anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so here black folks were making money, but like what they were making the money in was just like it was a little bit more creative, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
you
Yeah.
got to open up something, you got to do
Mm-hmm.
some, like institutionally we still were not welcome in
Mm-hmm.
bigger major places for
Mm-hmm.
just really a long time, right? And so um those strides, those advancements
Mm-hmm.
look different, and then
Mm-hmm.
that affected what the cities look like today. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I do agree with that. I just one thing I'm hoping is like people read your book, like, because it reads like one of those great Black history Black
Oh,
culture
thank
reminders. I
you.
don't know, since we're around the same age, I don't know if you remember that little pink book of Black History women. It was like workbook
I
size.
don't.
My aunt had sent it down for me from Detroit. Like my aunt actually, she was my first migrant. Like my mom's sister,
Uh-huh.
she moved to Detroit in the 80s, taught, retired from like Southfield and all of that. And she would, since she did not have children of her own, but she had plenty of nieces and nephews, we would all get a shipment from UPS. The brown truck rolling
Okay.
up in front of our house was Christmas Day every quarter. And in that brown
Oh.
truck, she would send clothing and she would also send us so many books, like pretty much all
Mhm.
the Black books I would get. And then, of course, like my mom and Oprah are the same age. So just seeing Oprah on the screen, even though my mom's way more religious and way more traditional, my aunt, her sister was the more progressive one of the two.
Mhm, mhm.
You know, it's the famous when you have the two pairs of sisters and the one, yeah, that's our little dynamic. But yeah, this book, and it had, that's when I learned about Ida B. Wells and Mary McLeod Bethune and Catherine Dunham and like all these Black women. And of course, Tar Beach. Now, I didn't have an actual copy of Tar Beach, but of course, it was in the library because Tar Beach hit right there at kindergarten time when we were being shaped. And so this was a big deal that people wanted to pay attention. And of course, you know, in my last episode, I talked to one of my fellow North Carolinians where we were talking about how we were growing up in the New South and all the
Ugh.
new stuff was coming up. And, you know, everybody was coming up, and Atlanta and DC were coming up. And even we were coming up, but it was that exposure and those books. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that not everybody is getting these kinds of books. And now here you've written something that, of course, because you're a journalist, you know, we got to cite our sources and we got to have our facts and we got to interview everybody. So it's the main people and it's the person that you're highlighting, and it is so readable and it is so accessible. Like I'm thinking about when you're talking about the Defender chapters, your book feels like reading the Defender. It's, I could give that book to
Mm.
anybody and they can see how everything happened, and then they can relive the parts that they remember living in. Like I'm on my way to the Oprah and Jordan parts, and I'm like, okay,
Okay,
I'm
okay.
I'm gonna get, yeah, that's gonna feel, because the other part of the book is so like, I just, and the thing is, you know, I we live in an audiobook realm, and of course we know we teach podcasts, we're on the podcast, you
Mhm.
know, that's, it's wonderful that we have all these options. And I'm definitely not that person that's like, oh well, you didn't read, you just read, somebody read to you, like just go away, go be ableist somewhere else, we don't have time for that.
Mhm.
But I wanted to commend you for writing this kind of book to bring this together. And I love that we had this kind of conversation today, because
Thank you.
so many of the conversations I have are like, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And I don't understand why people aren't moving here. And I don't understand why people want to, like, don't want to go here. You got to solve the racism problem. You got to solve the sexism problem. You got to solve the ableism problem. And then you got to, honestly, they do need to solve the food desert problem. Like one day
Mhm.
I would hope that somebody would be able to overcome the barriers we have in the food world right now, because clearly we love to eat, we have talked about it so much. So and I'm lunch because I'm on the East Coast and I'm recording this, it's an hour later than it is where you are. So but
Okay.
that is it though for me, like where you have centered certain aspects of music. Like I love that you give us a song at the beginning of every chapter. Like I had to do it because I was like, yup. I Everybody that reads my newsletter know I have a song. I DJ'd a little bit, like quiet DJ'd. I'm not, no record scratching, more of jazz in the college, in a white college newspaper and media spectrum. But I love that. And I really am excited for some of my folks that follow me, because I'm so hardcore on all the built environment stuff, to really sit down and read this book. And instead of what they were doing in 2020, where it was all those prescriptive books, they're just getting to know the people who did this. And they're seeing that, oh, they're going to do it anyway. Why not make it easier? Or, oh my gosh, it was so sad that they all had to leave. And oh my gosh, were my ancestors really that oblivious to a man handing them a plate of food on a train? Like that is the writing and everything has really centered in, and I really like that, and that's why, of course, this is going to be the only book recommendation on this episode. And I'm so glad we were able to sit down and talk, and I'm so glad that with this podcast I get to have these kinds of conversations. One last question I want for like the main portion, the recorded version, like how do you feel like in the vein of the show, how do you feel like you personally are defying gentrification? And do you feel like the region as a whole that you're in Chicago is doing well defying gentrification? Of course, we talked about living in a lot of different places. I mean, do you feel like other places are doing it better? Leave us with how you feel like you're defying, because I, of course, believe you can defy as Black folks, but ending is a whole other realm that's maybe not our responsibility.
Mhm,
That's kind of
mhm.
the idea here. It's kind of like this discussion we have
Yeah,
around racism. So,
yeah,
because
I
gentrification is a racism, it
yeah.
is what it is.
I guess I would say is that, there are a lot of people who are, like, staking claim on these neighborhoods that we helped build,
Mm.
and just saying, "This is where I live, and I'm happy with this place," and you don't have to, you don't have to try to convince me to move and get other people in here. And I just say that because I think that that is sometimes what how it may work, like
Mm-hmm.
convince people that there is another thing, like in Chicago, so many stories. There's been a lot of books out lately that have kind of referred in different ways to white flight in Chicago, where so many people in Chicago, white people left and moved to the suburbs, and now, of course, a lot of those white people want to move back to the city. Um, and I think that, a lot of folks are like, "This is my neighborhood. I love it. Like, you're welcome to live with us,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not going
Mm-hmm.
anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
But you're welcome to
Mm-hmm.
come too,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
say that because I've never heard a neighborhood say, "You can't come too," right? But it is, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So many,
Yeah.
like on my block, so many of my neighbors have been here. They have been
Mm-hmm.
here
Mm-hmm.
for years and years and years. One of my neighbors, everybody just calls him the mayor. They're like, he's the mayor of the
Yes.
block, right?
Yes.
Like, he
Yes.
has been here for generations.
Mm.
Like, this is the mayor's block. It's not even my block, really. It's the mayor's block, right?
Yes.
And so anybody else is welcome to come join us,
Mm-hmm.
but this is the mayor's block. And so just like staking that claim and not being afraid to say, this is my city. This is my neighborhood. These are places that I'm allowed to live and work and be, wherever those neighborhoods are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, 100%. Like, I definitely feel like that as well. Like, people, with this show, I want those stories to like come out. Like, people don't hear enough about us, because when we were trying to come in their neighborhoods, they were the ones bombing the houses. Like, and y'all really
Mhm.
had, it seemed like
Mhm.
it was y'all were really
Yes,
invested in
yes.
the house bombing.
Yes, there were
Where,
many, many house bombings,
yeah.
especially leading up to 1919, because we had so much
Mm-hmm.
overcrowding
Mm-hmm.
in the Black Belt, and people who had the means wanted to try to move other places, and it was, they would be
Whereas
bombed, yeah.
Whereas here we just the money, the money is a difference. Like, you have some of the dollar amounts I am seeing in Southeast and near South, like basically what we would say wards 5, 7, and 8, for people who know DC, and even Ward 4, like just any of the Black neighborhoods. Of course, a whole new map showed up, like I think like a couple days ago on my timeline, where it showed the neighborhoods that we've actually lost to the neighborhood changes. Now, DC, we're still at parity in the District of Columbia proper. And I want to honor that. Yeah, we have all these different neighborhoods and there's some sharing. My banker, and I know I have a banker, but I'm an independent. So I need to have a good relationship with bankers. So we were opening accounts and he's like, yeah, I grew up, he didn't say what like Latin country he was from, but I knew, I was like, okay, Columbia Heights, that's your end. you're from that end and y'all got that, but it's not like the borders are like this permeable thing. If anything, we're starting to see national retailers, once they take those incentives away, they just don't want to be with us in the first place, with all these pharmacies, with all these like locking everything up. And then we have our community where and I think I've noticed, I think it's more of white millennials waking up to, oh my gosh, I can't afford a house. Whereas that's always been something we've had to think about. We've always had to just go where we could with our choices. And our choices as Black millennials and Black folks in general, we're going to be different. And for so many of us, we've never had. So, of course, if you never had, and especially if you stayed in the South, we never had. So, of course, when we get somewhere, like if we made it to the North and we get that house, we're going to be happy with it. Then we're going to use that space. Like we're going to use, like people are going to be posted up in the backyard. We might subdivide it and there may be another family in the house and there may be like a business at home, or there may be like, we are creative in how we make our places. Like people want to put all kinds of labels on it, but we're going to stay creative and we're going to be defiant anyway. And so, yeah, I'm so glad you came by today, and just tell everybody, like, I'm going to put all your links and stuff in there. I'm going to use your good bio, but tell everybody where they can find you, other than where, of course, we're still hanging out here on that Twitter. Twitter is something else.
Yes. I am Arionne Nettles, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. So
yay. Good for you having one and making that one work for you. Cause I'm over here trying to brand myself and I'm just a person that loves cities and yarn. So I guess that's where we are at the moment. And yes, I'm gonna, of course, for those of y'all listening, I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna close out the show. I'm gonna do one more ad break. And of course, thank y'all for listening. Again, this is Defying Gentrification with Kristen Jefferson. We'll be back. So we're back after the interview. And yes, this is one more push to go buy this book. Go buy this book. If you have your appetite whetted by hearing us just have an honest, raw, kind of informal conversation about being two Black millennials, one who's a parent with a disabled child, and another who's a queer person, about where we live, how we live, the motivations of where we've lived, and what it's been like for us, people coming into the Great Recession and people that are vulnerable to schemes like bad parking meters. Read this book, and then you're a Black millennial like us. You will remember some of these things. You will remember when you reacted with some of these things. This is a multi-generational book because so many of these things your parents will know about, especially things like Soul Train. You'll want to have this. You'll want to read this book. You'll want to read it with your family. You'll want to make it a discussion point. You'll want to assign it in your classes. So just go on over to bookshop.org/shop/Kristen Jefferson to get this book. It is an ebook. It is available. Doing so in my bookshop store will support me having more of these kinds of conversations. If you like these conversations, go to that bookshop.org store and support me in having them. And yes, we are at the end of today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope if it rankled you by hearing the tenor of our conversation, that you think about why we live the way we live. And that we're not your average, I won't even say that we're NIMBYs. Like I'm definitely a NIMBY. And yes, in my backyard, like we got to think about where the backyard is and if somebody wants to say yes to us in the backyard. So think about that. And of course, we're coming up with some more guests this season. And if anything, this is going to be a podcast about urbanism and gentrification and urban planning. It's going to have guests you won't expect. It's going to have people talking about this in a totally different way and provide a variety. We're going to have practitioners, going to have journalists. So if you like what you're listening to, please come back. Please rate us and review us on all the networks that you can rate and review us on. I would especially love that if you're watching this video version that you subscribe to the channel, you share it, and also you can rate and review and subscribe to all audio versions as well. So, I'm Kristen Jeffers, and I run Kristen Jeffers Media, and I am the producer, the host, the source of interviews for this show. I record some parts of this. I recorded in Zoom with my iPhone. None of this is sponsored. Bookshop is my affiliate. It's sponsored. And if you want to advertise, let me know. So shoot me a note, Kristen@blackharvest.com. And yes, if you want to keep up with the show, if you want to make sure you get the show notes, Substack has a wonderful transcription version of this. So if you want just an audio written transcript, it's there. If you want to just have a comprehensive list of all the episodes, you go to theblackherbalist.com, you click on read newsletter. And not only do you have podcast updates, you have my live stream updates on Mondays. You have my essays on Sundays, where I oftentimes share more of my craft work. So absolutely, please subscribe on Substack or LinkedIn. And I know a lot of y'all are my little LinkedIn warriors. You stay on LinkedIn all the time. Definitely just add me to your LinkedIn stew. Get me in your inbox. Patreon is still there for you. Patreon.com/Kristen Jeffers if you want to support financially. Thank you to my new patron this week. You will, I believe I'm up to about 35 paid supporters. And yes, you can follow me on Patreon without paying now. There's a new feature. But I would love it if you would kick a little bit back for the show that pays for building staff. And I have a vision for this platform. I've had to make some pivots over the years, but I know having you here, and I will enjoy having you. So until next time, do everything you can to end and defy gentrification. Please and thanks.